The school week was coming to an end, and that meant only one thing: 2 carefree days of rest and relaxation. I danced into the store and bought a bunch of drinks and crisps for the evening I planned to dedicate to a home movie show. And it was on this Friday evening, when I was already making plans for the coming weekend, that my father called me. We spoke with him quite rarely, so his call was a big surprise for me. I hesitated a little and answered the call. "Hello son, how are you there? Have you forgotten your old man yet?" he jokingly asked. "Of course not. You try to forget. What has happened? Why are you calling so late?" "Yes, for several days now I have been thinking of inviting you to go fishing. Still, before you and I still somehow went, and then you left to study and my health was not the same. How do you look at it? I hope you have no plans for this weekend?" I sighed in shock. I definitely did not expect to hear such spontaneous news. In fact, there were plans, and even a lot, but my conscience did not allow me to refuse my father. I agreed. A hoarse, joyful voice on the other side of the tube exclaimed, "Great. Then come by when it's time. Even tomorrow, even the day after tomorrow. I will prepare my own things, fishing rods, etc., so you can travel light. Is it okay?" "Yes, good." I thought a little, I answered. After talking with my father for a few more minutes and wishing him good night, I finally ended the conversation. I was tormented by an unpleasant feeling of indecision. On the one hand, a carefree weekend calmly spent at home doing what I love, and on the other, an early rise, a long trip, and the subsequent 8 hours sticking to the floats. And yet my father counted on me. I really did not want to upset him. After all, we don't see each other very often. We need to get in touch at least sometimes. Yes, and fresh air obviously does not hurt me. Therefore, reluctantly, I put off a bunch of plans for later. Tomorrow I am going to the village on the first morning bus. The trip to the destination was boring and unremarkable. During their lives, everyone has already traveled a million times in pauses that are surviving. Therefore, I think the sensations are familiar and understandable to everyone. Having got off at the necessary stop, located in the forest belt, I headed along the long-learned route. As I walked, I suddenly realized how far away I had been from this place. Like a child, I looked with surprise at the tall pine trunks, admired every bush and blade of grass. Literally everything awakened my childish, long-forgotten thoughts and feelings. My heart felt very calm and warm, but my heart was filled with even greater warmth when, on the threshold of my native house, I saw my father beaming with a smile through his gray beard. We went into the house. Rich onion soup was already waiting for me on the table. Its smell, as if for a second, brought me back to my childhood. So, over a plate of fragrant stew, our conversation began, which lasted almost the whole day. We discussed the pressing issues from time to time. It seemed that our conversation would never end. And already sitting at dinner, we began to discuss the details of our outing tomorrow. "Look, son, tomorrow we get up early, at 4 a.m. This is the coolest. We're going overnight. There, by the lake, there is an old hunting lodge, so be calm for the night. The stove is working there, so we won't be lost from the cold. And now it is time to decide, soldier." My father patted me gently on the shoulder, and in a few minutes I was already lying under an old woolen blanket, looking forward to tomorrow's catch and a wonderful time. In the morning I found my father in the kitchen. He was preparing breaks for us. A lot of sandwiches with lard cakes and other things. Immediately went into a hiking backpack. Having dressed in fishing suits and taking fishing rods, we set out on our way. On the way, I kept looking out the window, admiring the forest landscapes. An hour and a half later we were there. U.S. creaking brakes, stopped in front of a slightly rickety hut. To tell you the truth, I didn't have any confidence in her. A gust of wind and this shack would fold in half. However, my father assured me that this house would outlive us with him. Having laid out the brought things inside the building and lit the stove, we without wasting a minute went towards the lake in the pre-dawn twilight. As we approached, the coastal smell of freshness became more and more distinct. Soon a serene expanse of water appeared before my eyes, disturbed only by dragonflies landing on it and moving stalks of reeds. I haven't experienced such peace in a long time. Having thrown the fishing rods, we began to wait for a bite. More precisely, my father was waiting for a bite, and I looked in amazement at the endless water shrouded in haze and leaving the horizon in a border of a green semicircle of vegetation. At that moment I was not interested in anything but this bewitching view, which as a city dweller, was a curiosity for me. Overwhelming emotions forced me to blurt out an involuntary phrase, "Wow, what a beautiful lake this is." "Yeah," his father drawled, "and dangerous." I was slightly pulled back and I asked again. I was sure that I heard right. The father, as if realizing that he had blurted out too much, immediately retreated. "I say, beautiful." And he hesitated for a second. "In general, keep an eye on the float, otherwise we'll cook the horseradish so much." You'll miss everything." My father cut me off roughly and frowning his brows glared at the red and white ball on the surface of the water. It was obvious that something was bothering him. I did not ask for trouble. Maybe I really heard and silently continued to fish. 3 hours later we were able to catch several weighty carp from which we made a cauldron of fragrant fish soup. Over a hearty dinner cooked on a fire the father relaxed a little and kinder. This was facilitated by several Balenciaga bubbles, prudently captured from home. Chattering I forgot our strange conversation on the lake. So, during a cheerful conversation we did not notice how the night twilight was gathering over us. At one moment father wiping his mouth with his sleeve glanced briefly at his watch and changed his face. His eyes widened and he turned pale and shuddered a little. The drunken mischief instantly dissipated, giving way to severe anxiety. Having blown himself up, he grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and dragged me into the house with force. I didn't even have time to understand anything, as I immediately found myself lying on the carpet in the hallway. With a roar the father closed the door with 2 locks and a latch, after which he began to run around the rooms and curtain all the available windows. Still not understanding anything, I, rubbing my bruised ass, loudly exclaimed, "What kind of tricks is this, Dad?" What the hell is going on? You would even bring your rear into the house. She shouldn't disappear. Lord, now I'll bring it myself. I walked sullenly towards the door, ready to pull the handle down. "Bear, your mother's leg, stop!" Fuck that here. Don't you dare go out. And then the father's voice was interrupted by a strange howl that came from the side of the lake. There was such an impression that it was a radiation siren or a whale buzzing. The noise gradually increased, pressing on the ears. With the increase in its volume behind the closed curtains, something incomprehensible was happening. The darkness on the street began to thicken incredibly quickly, plunging the already dark room into an impenetrable black veil. My father was sitting on the floor, leaning back on the sofa. A pectoral cross was clamped in his hands. His father's lips were trembling, inaudibly whispering some kind of prayer. I sat and watched in horror the bacchanalia that was taking place. The brain flatly refused to perceive all this madness. And then all of a sudden everything fell silent. The rumble subsided, followed by dead silence. For several minutes I tried in vain to listen to my surroundings, but apart from the buzzing in my ears and my own breathing, nothing could be heard. The forest birds, which had been chirping all day long, also fell silent. Something told me that this is clearly not good. I don't know how many hours I sat without moving. The body seemed to have fallen into some kind of trance. My father's measured sniffling brought me out of it. Apparently, he was sleeping. I got up as quietly as possible and immediately doubled over from the cutting pain in my stomach. My bladder, all these hours showing no signs of anxiety, suddenly became active. I immediately rushed to the toilet. Having done my work, I went back to the room. Along the way, a sudden thought occurred to me to look out the window. Fear immediately grew into curiosity, which beckoned me to the drawn curtains like a moth to a fire. In fact, well, there will be nothing bad if I look through the crack. What is happening there, I thought, and how it turns out I was wrong. Constantly looking sidelong at my sleeping father, I pushed back the edge of the curtain with my little finger and looked out into the street. And what I saw there plunged me into an indescribable shock. An impenetrable haze stretched beyond the windowsill. A dense blue-gray fog shrouded the surroundings of the hut with its veil. It felt like I was just looking at a concrete wall, trying to at least make out something in this smoke. I was surprised to stumble upon a few blue dots that rushed at a distance. I rubbed my eyes. The dots flashed through the mist again for a split second. There were 7 or 9 of them, going in a semicircle one after another. Then a similar glow appeared from the other side. And then, suddenly, a crushing blow flew through the window. Glass flew into the room, scattering on the floor in a hail. Well, then, someone's hand grabbed me by the collar. More precisely, it was a paw. I had a second to see her, black and slimy, like oil. The limb was covered with prickly scales, and on the forearm one could see a kind of fin. Then I realized that the two-fingered, webbed hand holding my sweater had incredible strength. Trying to escape from the death grip of the monster, I witnessed how the owner of this terrible hand appeared from behind the frame. A huge fish head with bumpy growths and big eyes stared at me with an expressionless look. I reflexively smacked the creature in the face, and it was a fatal mistake. The fish-headed monster squealed and immediately began to transform. It somehow puffed up, and a webbed, slimy hood opened on its head with a nasty champ, causing its toothy mouth to stretch to an even larger size. On the spiked bone carapace of the creature, several long stalks outgrowths rose, at the ends of which blue dots shone. That blue glow seemed to come from every part of his vile body. All this action lasted no more than a minute, but for me it seemed like an eternity. I was brought out of my daze by the cry of my father, who threw a stool into the slippery face of the creature. The monster loosened its grip and, falling, disappeared into the mist. My father jerked me away from the window and cursed, "Misha, what have you done?" I warned you. Now we are definitely finished with you. After these words, I flopped down like a wreck. Panic and awareness of the horror of our situation finally killed in me a sound perception of everything that was happening. However, this was only the beginning. Dozens of blue lights lit up in the fog. Apparently, that creature attracted its vile relatives with its squeal. My father rushed to the closet for a gun. At that time I stood in the corner, paralyzed with horror. Loading his gun, my father blindly fired a double volley into the fog. A terrible scream went up from the other side of the broken window. And loading a few more cartridges, my father, turning to me, commanded, "There, hold the door." Dante let them in. With shaking hands, I began to move chests of drawers and bedside tables to the entrance, and, as it turned out, just in time, a mighty blow came through the door. Father raised his gun to the door. "Lie down." He yelled and fired again from 2 barrels, leaving large holes in the door. The sound of the shot, like a bell, hit my head. Everything around me swirled and swam. The ringing mixed with fear completely exhausted my body. The last thing I remember was the blurry face of my father above me, muffled squeals and several shots. I woke up only in the morning, on the sofa and with a wet bandage on my head. Everything sparkled and swam before my eyes. After lying like that for about 5 minutes, I still got up on my elbows. Father was sitting by the broken window, smoking a cigarette with a trembling hand. Looking down, I saw an impressive mountain of cigarette butts. He noticed that I stood up. "Alive, Mishka?" he asked in a slightly trembling voice, continuing to look out the window. "It's good, good. It's all over the gone." And indeed, the usual sunlight beat through the window and the chirping of birds was heard. After a little silence, I asked a question, the answer to which completely changed my life. "Dad, what was that?" Father dragged on and began his story. "Son, after I tell you everything, you may stop communicating with me, but I don't care anymore. You must know the truth. When we were young, your mother and I often went to this place, overnight stays, gatherings by the fire, everything. We spent time together there, ignoring the stories of the old people that this place was not good. The same as you were, hot young. We soon got married at 8 months pregnant with you. They decided to celebrate the wedding right here, on this very place. And when you were born, we moved to live in our village house. However, we didn't rejoice for long. On the same summer night, fog swept over the village. It was then that I first encountered these underwater creatures. They took your mother right out of bed. And I stood like a coward and looked after them and could not do anything. Since then a heavy burden has been on me. I brought a curse on my entire family. We held a wedding on their land, and for this, now, for the rest of my life, I am obliged to bring a bloody payment for my recklessness. They have already taken your mother and grandmother. You were next in line. That night I had to give them you to be torn to pieces, but I couldn't, and something tells me, I'll cry bitterly for this. After that, we just sat silently for several hours, and then packed our things and drove back. The road also passed in silence. Upon arrival in the village, without saying a word, I left in the direction of the bus stop. My father didn't try to stop me. Sitting on the bus, I tried to forget all this experienced horror. And as soon as I was in my apartment, I immediately fell motionless on the bed, unable to bear the piled stress anymore. It has been 2 months since that terrible day. I almost recovered and returned to my old life. He no longer had contact with his father. Yesterday I decided to call him, but he never picked up the phone. I hope everything is fine with him.